Hello people, and welcome to Crypto Exposed. Top Swift exec takes aim at XRP, says surviving a lawsuit isn't resilience. Okay guys, let's get into it. Okay, so I'm sure you guys have seen this. It caught up quite a frenzy when it did come out, and as you guys know, I don't get to record my videos daily, so I'm a little late to the party here. I'll do it when I get a chance to do it, but I knew I was going to cover this as soon as I saw this, so I want to give my thoughts in regards to this, and I'm going to give you a really balanced approach to this. I'm going to tell you what I agree with, what I don't agree with, and what I think about his thoughts overall. In the end, I'll give a summary of what I think. So, who is the individual who said this? His name is Tom Zach, I believe. I'm going to go with Zach because if it's not Zach, I have no idea how to pronounce his name. But who is he? He works for Swift. Long story short, as I said, he's a Swift executive, so he's a worker with Swift. And yeah, he's had some thoughts to say in regards to Ripple, basically. And I thought I'd get into this because there's certain things that I can understand his point, but there's certain things about it that I completely disagree with. So I want to give like a completely balanced approach to this, okay? So I'm going to go through parts of this article. I'm not going to read it all out because really I just want to address like my points of the argument to some of the things that have been said. So let's get into the first part that he says here. So he says, calling attention to past trends from the internet payments to blockchain, Zach argued that financial institutions only act when compliance, security, and legal enforceability are firmly established. He pointed out that many past innovations, such as stablecoins and DeFi, failed to gain widespread adoption because they lacked the necessary trust and legal backing. However, Zach believes public blockchains have become too significant to ignore in 2025. They are beginning to support real-world use cases such as tokenized government bonds, blockchain-based financial guarantees, and cross-border payments that settle quickly and securely. Still, he stressed that blockchains alone are not the complete solution. Safeguards and legal protections are required for institutional trust and adoption. Okay, right. So the first thing I want to say in regards to this, what he's saying here is really just stating the obvious, right? It's a bit more like common sense. At the end of the day, when it comes to institutions, you know, governments, etc., they're not going to use the technology until there's regulations in place. And this is something that we're all in agreement with, right? Like this is something that we've been saying for a long time. Hey, we want regulations. We want this all to be, you know, set out properly. So these companies who want to get involved and these institutions that want to get involved can get involved. That's been one of the things that's been blocking blockchain adoption really at this point, because the companies and stuff, like as he said, there's use cases now that he's seeing it's too much to ignore at this point. So it is coming, but it's the regulations that we're really waiting for, so the companies really can get involved, because we've seen what happened with Ripple, right, in terms of you know, the SEC suing them and that leading to them having having legal issues. So obviously a lot of companies are going to be scared to wanting to use these blockchains or work with these companies if they feel there could be legal ramifications. Now, one of the things I will say that I do think has been such a big problem in regards to this is, you know, the SEC from the previous party, right? In the previous party, we had a situation where the SEC were corrupt and they were not trying to help crypto. They were trying to destroy it. Let's tell it like it is. And, because of that, they wasn't trying to bring regulations out. So they stalled blockchain innovation for years. Like if you look at the difference of what's happened now that we've had a pro-crypto party involved with the SEC, you can see the difference that's happened like in less than a year. So you can tell that if we had that kind of support from the get-go, you know, blockchain and crypto could be way further down the line now in terms of innovation and adoption. So yes, I do agree that we need these types of things in place to help in regards to getting it further adopted, etc. But that's quite stating the obvious, right? We all know that. Okay, so let's get to the next part then. So this is in regards to the main issue of what was said here. So there was a guy who was basically talking about Ripple surviving the lawsuit and showing how, you know, that shows great resilience for a company and how that's going to be, you know, an early indicator that like Ripple and XRP are going to be successful. So I've actually got Tom Zach's actual response here, and I'm going to get into that. So he said, surviving lawsuits isn't resilience. Neutral shared governance is. Institutions don't want to live on a competitor's rails, and compliance isn't about one company convincing regulators it should be allowed to operate. It's about an entire industry agreeing on shared standards that no single balance sheet controls. Okay, right. So let me get into that then, right? Okay. So the first thing I'll say about that, right? I've said this before. Like, one of the reasons why I thought that Ripple may have a bit of an issue is because if like Ripple were to get madly successful with XRP, it could create a monopoly for Ripple, right? They could get hugely valuable from the XRP that they hold, which would make the company significantly dominant. And it could create a monopoly, which I don't think obviously people are going to want, especially, Swift, which is basically like a conglomerate of banks. So I do understand that point. But the one thing I will say is they don't have to go through Ripple. They can still just use the XRP ledger on its own, right? So it's not like they have to just go through Ripple and use ODL. They could just use the XRP ledger itself because it is decentralized. Now, in regards to what I was saying about Ripple, obviously they would still hold XRP at the moment because they hold the escrow. But this is something that you have to think about, right? It could be a thing where, Ripple, for the greater good of having the blockchain adopted, they might be willing to give up parts of the escrow. Now, I'm not saying that that's going to happen because I don't know, right? That's kind of their moneymaker. So I'm not saying they definitely would, but maybe they would give up a lot of the percentages of it and keep a certain percent, because you got to remember they are actually giving up certain amounts of the escrow slowly but surely anyway. Like, the plan is for XRP to eventually become completely decentralized and they won't hold nowhere near as much of the XRP, right? That's why they keep doing the escrow releases every so often. So the plan is to ultimately become, more decentralized over time. Now, I don't know how long that plan is for. I don't know how long it will take. So obviously it would be expediting the process if this was to happen. But again, it might be that they're willing to say, hey, if this is something that is going to help XRP be adopted on a global scale where, you get a strong group of banks, etc., willing to use it, then yeah, it's very possible that they might be willing to give up, a percentage of the escrow to allow that to happen. Because even if they only keep a small percent, if XRP is going up massively in value, they're still going to benefit from that, right? So they may have less tokens, but they still might have way more value in the tokens anyway. So they still end up getting a good amount of money from it, right? So they've still become the success story that they wanted to become. So that is an option. That is a possibility. Now, the other thing I'll say in regards to this, in regards to him saying about competitors' rails, well, my thing here then, when you say about this, what exactly is your alternative? Because any crypto network you're talking about here could be a competitor, right? Like, I get it that Ripple are applying for the banking license, so it is a little bit different in that regard because they clearly actually want to become a bank. But, if you're using Ethereum, if you wanted to use Hedera, if you wanted to use Cardano, if you wanted to use any network or even like a stablecoin, like, you're still going to be helping line the pockets of another company. Because, for example, USDC or USDT, Tether, Circle, these are still owned by centralized companies. So when you say this, like, what exactly is your alternative here, right? And this is when I get to the point of something I am going to bring into question here shortly. Is there an agenda here? And I don't want to get like conspiracy theory when I say this, so I will explain shortly what I mean when I'm saying this. But because you're saying that blockchain technology is too big to ignore, so it sounds like you are accepting that blockchain technology is going to be adopted. So what is the issue with you saying XRP or Ripple can't be used? Now, I assume, just going by what he's saying here about the, having that amount of money on the single balance sheet, I assume it's the old age argument to people saying that XRP is centralized because Ripple hold so much of the supply. first and foremost, I'm not going to get into this too much at this point, but XRP is decentralized. And again, if he doesn't understand that, then he clearly just doesn't understand crypto technology, which doesn't surprise me. I'm not being funny, but the guy who works for Swift, he's probably still new learning what crypto actually is. So he probably doesn't really understand like how all of this really does work. He might just be very misinformed in regards to what decentralization and centralization is, or he just has an opinion that is just incorrect, whatever. But that's the only reason why I can think of as to why he's saying this. But even if you want to start getting into that conversation, well, again, what blockchain are you going to use? Because you're not going to use Bitcoin because Bitcoin isn't feasible. And if you want to get technical, you could say, okay, Satoshi owns a certain amount of Bitcoin, right? Michael Saylor is buying a lot of Bitcoin. So there's big percentages of Bitcoin that is now going to centralized, people or companies. So you could argue the same thing technically about Bitcoin if you wanted to. Then you could go to Ethereum. It's got consensus. You can go to HBAR. It has Hedera. You can go to Cardano. It has, is it input output? I believe that Charles Hoskinson runs, to develop on Cardano. But you get the gist, right? Like there's a lot of these networks that have companies that, support them and, aid to the development of the networks. So if you're not looking at XRP, what are you looking at? Because I could put this argument to a lot of these blockchains if you really want to go down that road. So what's your point here? What are you getting at? Like, what's the network that you think is so great that would be the better choice in opposition to XRP and Ripple? Because that's what I would really like to know. So this is where, like, I can understand some of his point here, but I can also say, well, there's reasons why this doesn't have to be as much of a concern. And this is the thing, right? If you listen to what he's saying, neutral shared governance is what is resilience. Like, institutions don't want to be on a competitor's rails. In terms of the competitor's rails, I do get that. But as I say, you don't have to use ODL. You could just use the XRP ledger separately, right? You can use it independently. But in terms of like this shared governance, you know what this is, right? This is them wanting to be the gatekeepers. This is exactly what the banks are trying to fight back against, right? This is why when Ripple applied for the banking license, the banks all came together and said, don't give them the license. This isn't about what the better choice is. This is about fear of not wanting to lose revenue. It's them basically not wanting to have to share revenue. They want all the money to themselves and they don't want more people coming in, taking a piece of their pie. But this is going to happen whether they like it or not. That's exactly what this is about. So to me, part of this, it looks to me like it's partly fear. If I'll be honest with you, like I think this is like fear of them knowing that crypto is coming. They don't really like that it's coming, but they know it's undeniable at this point. It's not something that they can keep trying to brush to the side. But they're trying to limit the winners and the losers, right? They're trying to make it so they can pick who gets through the door. They're trying to be the gatekeepers. And I don't like that, right? Because at the end of the day, Ripple should be able to operate by themselves if they want to. And it should be that if people choose to use them, then Ripple becomes a success. It shouldn't be that it's all this shared governance, etc. Because you're saying that in terms of, everybody making this agreement. But what you're basically saying is we want to have control and we want to agree on who's successful and who isn't. Why couldn't Ripple come in and operate by themselves as a standalone company? Why do they have to conform to your standards if they don't need to? It's competition. That's exactly what it is, and they don't like it. So I can see that from a mile off here. Now, the one thing I'll say about this as well, like people are saying, well, this is what Swift's thoughts are. This is how Swift are thinking as a whole, right? The first thing I'll say about that is I'm not so convinced on that anyway, because like, you got to understand that this is just one person who works for a company. Like, usually like if you go on like X or something, you see someone's profile, they normally say like my thoughts are my own or something like that, because they're not like representing the thoughts of the company as a whole. Now, don't get me wrong. Does this guy possibly have like inside information because he works with Swift, so he might know exactly what's being said? Yeah, possibly. I'm not trying to completely dismiss that at all. But what he's saying here could be just his personal opinion. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a reflective of Swift as a whole. This could just be what he thinks. It doesn't mean that this is exactly what's actually going to happen. So it doesn't mean that whatever he's saying is fact anyway, right? At the moment, all we can take as this is his personal opinion. Now, he does obviously have some experience and some knowledge in this field, so I'll give him that, but it doesn't mean that what he's saying is a fact. The other thing I'll say is this. Let's just say this guy is into crypto. He could be into a different crypto. So this could be personal, right? Like, let's just say he likes Ethereum, for example. What if he's an Ethereum holder? It could be that he's here trying to knock XRP because he doesn't like XRP. He could be an Ethereum holder, and so he knocks XRP whenever he can get chance. So we don't really know if this is coming from a genuine place or not, right? This could be coming from a very tribalistic standpoint of someone who just doesn't like XRP or doesn't like Ripple or whatever, and as I said, Ripple are now going to be competition for Swift. This isn't a thing anymore where Ripple are looking to try and work with Swift. Ripple are going head to head with Swift. So you've got to remember, these are coming from the talks of Ripple's the new disruptor in the place, the new kid on the block. Swift's the older, they're getting past their prime, can't really hang anymore. They're bitter and jealous, right? Their time is coming up. And this isn't me saying that I think, Swift will become absolutely obsolete. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that there's newer technology out here. And I just don't think banks, I don't think Swift, I don't think they want to compete like this. They don't want it like this. It's been fine for however many years. And now they've got to start pulling their finger out and start actually doing things to compete, which is not what they really ideally want. So this is where I was getting to the point of the agenda and what I was saying about the tribalistic, because this is just the last part that I wanted to address about this. I got another article here that was talking about it, and it actually says in this article that Tom Zach actually called XRP a dead chain walk-in. Now, this is when I got to the point of saying, you know what, I don't know if this is a genuine, neutral, unbiased opinion. Because to call XRP a dead chain walk-in is just complete ignorance. And it's just completely inaccurate. We've seen the adoption that's coming with XRP. We've seen the partnerships. We've seen how much exposure XRP is getting. We've been told that Wall Street are watching XRP. We've been seeing how many ETFs have been filed for XRP. We know that XRP is a thriving chain. We know that. So to call it a dead chain walk-in, this is when I got to the point of you know what? This to me sounds like something personal. This doesn't sound to me like this is someone just being completely honest. Because to say it like that to me, it's not professional, in my opinion. It's just not. And so when I heard that, that's when I started to think, I feel like this is someone's more, personal thoughts and might, even if it is, Swift, again, Swift as a whole could just be angry, right? Swift as a whole could just be angry that they're having to go through this and the technology is improving and changing. It could be, but what I'm saying is this is bitterness. This is, them trying to slay XRP, put it down, and it's completely inaccurate. This is where you're getting into the high school antics, right? Calling names and stuff like that. So at this point, I was I'm not so sure I agree with this now. This, I'm definitely feeling like this is just trying to knock XRP for no reason. And the thing I'll say is this, right? Let's just go with the hypothetical that Swift won't use XRP for, as a bridge currency or whatever. I hope you understand that XRP's future is not solely reliant on cross-border payments. It's not. People make out cross-border payments is the only thing XRP can do. Now, admittedly, Ripple put a huge focus on that, but it can do many other things, right? It can do many other things. So when you point it into this kind of sole thing, its sole purpose is just to do cross-border payments, no, there's many things going on with XRP right now. You've got DeFi, you've got tokenization, you've got the AMM. Do you know what I mean? There's huge use cases going on other than cross-border payments. So even if Swift don't use XRP, and even if XRP isn't greatly adopted for cross-border payments, it doesn't mean that XRP is going to fail. It could still succeed in other areas. So again, when you're speaking like this and calling it a dead chain, even with that, if you're basing it on cross-border payments as well, again, it shows you how ignorant you are or how how little you actually understand about this technology, right? Because you should understand that there's many more factors to this that's going to make a success than just cross-border payments. So yeah, to me, this came from the words of someone who, I don't know if they've got a gripe or they hold a different crypto, whatever, but it seems like someone who's got a grudge here. And to me, it just seems like they're trying to put XRP down and Ripple down. I personally don't agree with it. Like, I'm not saying that there weren't some valid points in here, but overall, this doesn't give me anything to say that it's a concern. So for anybody who's been worried now, thinking, does this mean XRP is going to fail? Absolutely not. First and foremost, the things that he's saying, there's ways around it. Like, as I say, Ripple could give up the escrow, etc., etc. So there's things like that. And there's alternatives as well. There's alternatives that can make XRP a success too. And there's still reasons as to why some banks would still want to use XRP. Because with Swift, yes, you have got a huge conglomerate of banks. But you've got to understand, for the smaller banks, the cross-border payment feature, right, it's actually more beneficial for smaller banks than the bigger banks, right? Why? Because the smaller banks are paying the bigger banks for the nostro-vostro accounts. So basically, the smaller banks can't afford to do cross-border services on their own because they haven't got the kind of money and liquidity that the bigger banks have. So they pay a fee to use the bigger banks' nostro-vostro accounts. And so it's the smaller banks that would actually benefit more from using cross-border payments using ODL and XRP, right? And so you might have these bigger banks who might all be, not wanting to use XRP, but you could have a load of smaller banks who still want to use XRP. And this is why I said, again, it's not going to be about every single bank using XRP. It hasn't. There could still be enough smaller banks who are using it to still make it a success. See, do you see what I mean? There's so many holes I can poke in what he's trying to say. So, yeah, I'll leave it there. I think I've said enough. But yeah, to me, guys, this isn't anything that gives me any kind of concern. If anything, I actually just think it's someone who's a little bit out of touch, in my opinion. Oh yeah, and just another thing quickly. He talks about trust, right? And I was saying this before about what network you're going to use with trust. You got to understand this, like, when you talk about trust, people using stablecoins, that's going to require trust. Not every country is going to want to use another country's stablecoin, right? So if you've got, for example, let's just say USDC, just to be fair, so I'm not just saying Ripple. Let's just say USDC became the official digital dollar. Well, you've got this thing like BRICS, right? Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and others have joined too now, who are trying to become less reliant on the dollar. So are they going to want to use the stablecoin? Right? Are they going to want to use the stablecoin, a US dollar stablecoin, when they're trying to be less reliant on the dollar? That's their whole purpose. Or would they say, hey, you guys use a bridge asset, so you can send it as your dollar, but we'll get it in whatever our fiat currency is, that stablecoin. So we'll get it as the digital pound or the digital yuan, for example. You see what I mean? So they're using XRP as the bridge. It makes sense because they haven't got to have trust in another country's stablecoin or that company's stablecoin, and worry that stablecoin could go down at any day, right? That's another element of trust. So when you're talking about this, you've got to think about trust on a bigger scale than just, okay, we're America, we run stuff, so everybody's going to just conform to us. No, people are actually trying to move away from that now, especially with, the ups and downs that's been going on with like the tariffs and things like that. That's shown that people want to try now, countries, they want to try and move away from that. They don't want to be subject to these types of bullying tactics. Do you see what I mean? So that's what I'm saying. Like, some of the things that he's saying here, like, what's the alternative is what I'm asking. Because if you're saying that blockchain technology can't be ignored, what's the alternative? What are you thinking is the great alternative here then? Because I'm yet to see what he said as the answer to that. And that's the thing. So you've got to give an answer. So yeah, that's my thoughts. I'm not concerned about this. Thank you very much for watching this. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And hit that bell. Take care.